Just a couple things at the top. I think you saw the Secretary react yesterday to the earthquake in Ecuador, and of course, we continue to express our deepest condolences for the tragic loss of life and for all those who have been affected by this devastating quake. At this time, I can tell you that we are aware of the death of one U.S. citizen, and I can also tell you that we've been in contact with the family. We're still working with the Ecuadorian authorities to verify the welfare and the whereabouts of all U.S. citizens in the area at the time of the earthquake. I don't need to tell you how difficult that task can be, especially after a natural disaster. As I said, right now we're aware of one U.S. citizen being killed, but we're going to continue to work very closely with Ecuadorian authorities going forward. And as we have information that we can confirm for you, we will. And again, the United States has offered whatever assistance the Ecuadorian authorities might find useful, and we stand ready to work with the Ecuadorian government, of course, in this time of crisis. And then a scheduling note, as you probably now know, the Secretary will begin some travel this week. He'll go tomorrow to New York City, then on the 20th and 21st to Cairo, Egypt, and Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, respectively. While he's in New York, the Secretary will meet with Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif to discuss the implementation of the JCPOA and to follow up on earlier conversations regarding regional issues, including the continued work of trying to get to a political resolution in Syria. On the 20th, he will meet with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Foreign Minister Sami Shukri to discuss a range of bilateral and regional issues there. And then on the 21st, he will join President Obama in Riyadh at the Gulf Cooperation Council Summit. With that, Matt.
Right, so on New York, part one.
New York, part one.
Where and when?
Well, tomorrow. I don't have the exact physical location, but we'll get that for you. But
Well, I mean, do you think
it's in New York, and
will it be at the UN?
I don't know exactly where it will be.
Okay, and what's the can you be more precise about the reason?
No, actually, I don't think I can, and I'm not trying to be glib on that. I mean, they really do want to talk about implementation of the JCPOA and how it's going. And I think the Secretary will, as he always does, use the opportunity to talk to Foreign Minister Zarif about other issues, particularly regional issues. And I have no doubt that events as they unfold in Geneva will be on the agenda as well.
All right, well, as it relates to the JCPOA, I mean, it's no secret that the Iranians have been complaining for weeks now about the fact that they don't think that they're getting the relief that they deserve complying with it. And, the central bank chief was here in town last Friday. He made the complaint, Zarif and Mogherini. Zarif, during their press conference, he made the same kind of complaints, and also said that he would be raising this with Secretary Kerry. So is the Secretary prepared to have an answer for him? Will the administration move ahead with anything to assuage the Iranian concerns?
Look, we're obviously aware of these concerns that they've expressed about the status of sanctions relief. And the Secretary is very mindful that that topic will come up tomorrow, that is very much on Foreign Minister Zarif's mind. It is, and again, I wasn't trying to be glib, but it's all part of discussing the implementation of JCPOA, and from their perspective, this is very much an implementation issue, and he'll be prepared to discuss that with them. I won't get ahead of what that discussion is going to get into in terms of detail, or what, if anything, the Secretary will be able to say about it afterward. But clearly we know this is on their mind, and the Secretary will be ready to talk to them about it.
All right, and then related to this, well, actually it's not just related, it is this as well. What is this about Ambassador Mull sending letters to all 50 governors telling them to please remove their sanctions, if they have any, on Iran?
I don't. That's not the purpose of the letters. These letters were sent to the governors of all 50 states, and some other local leaders to try to do a good job of explaining what implementation of the JCPOA looks like, to help them understand whatever changes in U.S. policy have been implemented as a result of the JCPOA, particularly those changes that could impact state and local laws and regulations. They provide basic information about the agreement and identify resources for state and local officials so that they can better understand what these changes mean. It points them to places. You've probably seen a copy of one of these letters at least, and it points them to places online where they can go to get more information. It really is just an explanatory letter to try to give them a greater sense of awareness, because they have had questions, understandably.
Does it not say that they should make their laws compliant with the JCPOA or with the changes that the administration has made on a federal level as a result of the JCPOA?
It does encourage state and local officials to take into account the changes to our sanctions that resulted from the JCPOA, and to examine whether those changes affect the implementation of their state and local laws. So it does call their attention to some of the changes now to our sanctions posture as a result of, and encourages them to consider that as they enact local laws and regulations.
The one letter that, well, all the letters are identical, or are they tailored for each state?
As I understand it, they are pretty much identical in terms of the information, but there's
right.
some personalization, obviously.
Well, other than the addressing.
Yeah, I mean, but they don't go into great lengthy detail about state and local
Well,
laws.
has the administration
for each
done a
recipient.
study of state and local laws and determined that there are, in fact, state and local laws that would have to be
I think
altered or rescinded in order to comply with JCPOA?
I'm not aware that there's been a comprehensive study of every local law and regulation. I'll take the question and try to get back to you on that. I don't think that was really the purpose. The purpose was to try to answer questions that were coming in about it from local leaders. And we believe that, given the amount of questions we were getting, that this would be a helpful tool for them to use. It does not require action by them. It does not compel action by them. We cannot order action by them to alter laws and regulations. It's simply to draw their attention to the changes and give them resources so that they can make more informed decisions. It certainly encourages them to take into account the changes to our sanctions as they consider local laws and regulations.
Well, I don't get it. What do you mean it doesn't compel them or doesn't order them to? I mean, can local,
Doesn't
can
require
state and law?
specific action.
Well, so it's okay now if state and local governments have laws that are that contradict federal laws?
Well, of course not, Matt. But
Oh,
that's
okay.
not what
So
that's
the
not what I'm
administration
saying.
then is, well, okay, maybe not in this letter, but I mean, they clearly, if the administration has done something to change its sanctions, that would supersede
If and I'm not an expert here,
Right.
but if in the changes to the U.S. sanction regime, it does require commensurate changes to local laws and regulations, well, then that's the expectation. But the letter was simply to give them a higher sense of awareness of what the sanctions relief package
Right,
looks
but
like.
so would the administration be willing to take state and local governments to court to force their compliance with what it believes to be this?
I won't engage in a hypothetical.
All right, and then the last one, does it mention anything about sanctions that state and local authorities might have put in place against Iran for reasons other than nuclear?
Not that I'm aware of.
So it only applies to nuclear-related
And the
sanctions.
JCPOA specifically, yeah.
Can I have a follow-up on the Karim Zarif meeting?
Sure.
Who requested that meeting? Has it been on the calendar for a while?
It's been something that the two of them have communicated about. I honestly don't know whose idea it was. This is obviously a topic that they continue to discuss on a routine basis, implementation of the JCPOA, every time they speak, every time they meet. So this is something they routinely communicate about. I don't know whose idea it was. I know that they have been wanting to meet face-to-face for quite some time, and this turned out to be a convenient opportunity given the travel schedule for both individuals.
A little bit linked to Syria, what is the Secretary going to be asking him with regard to the, can I call it collapsed, peace talks in Geneva?
I actually wish you wouldn't call it collapsed.
Well, how do you see it?
I think it's, you probably saw Special Envoy de Mistura's press conference today, and I think he couched it very well, that it still remains, the discussions are still challenged, obviously. And he acknowledged that the HNC has asked to put the discussions on pause, in part because of their concern over continued violations of the cessation of hostilities, and they mentioned specifically the lack of humanitarian access. So these are real concerns that they have. But he also said that they are willing to stay in Geneva and till the end of the week, and that we would revisit this on Friday and see where we are. So I don't think that we would characterize these talks as anything other than the difficult endeavor that they have always proven to be, and that they will continue to prove to be. Now, as for the discussion with Foreign Minister Zarif, again, I don't want to telegraph every aspect of an agenda of a meeting that hasn't happened yet, but clearly, I mean, this is, again, the political process in Syria is something that the Secretary and Foreign Minister Zarif discuss frequently, because Iran is at the table as a member of the ISSG, and he will continue to talk to Foreign Minister Zarif about how Iran can be helpful going forward in the political process, how they can use the influence that they too have over the Assad regime to try to compel the right kind of behavior out of the regime with respect to both the cessation and to the delivery of humanitarian access. And I think it also is it'll prove a good opportunity for both men to sit down and kind of review where we are, especially in light of the press conference today by Mr. de Mistura.
I mean, one of the reasons is
Hey, hang on. Yes, you may. But
one of the reasons being the fighting around Aleppo. Do you believe that it's justified by the opposition to halt the talks until that situation is dealt with?
Well, I'm not going to judge the decision that the HNC made, and neither did Mr. de Mistura. They have asked to pause the talks, but they've agreed to stay until Friday and to revisit where we are. And it sounded to me like Mr. de Mistura was going to respect that request. And these are UN-led talks, and I'm not going to insert us into them. I would also point to something else he said, which is that these talks were never going to be easy, that they were not going to start out with a quick settlement on some of the core issues, that he expected that both sides would start from positions that were very far apart, and that it would take quite a bit of time to bring them into agreement about things. And obviously that's proven true, and we've never said anything different, that we knew it was going to be hard. So again, while they certainly have asked for this pause, and the concerns that they have, quite frankly, are concerns we share in terms of the lack of humanitarian access, or I should say the lack of some sort of sustained delivery of humanitarian assistance, and what we continue to see are violations of the cessation of hostilities. Again, I want to point, he said it, but I said it again last week. There's still, even for the violations that have been occurring, and nobody's disputing that there are violations, the violence is still significantly reduced in Syria. And more Syrian people are living better lives as a result of the cessation than they were before. This war's gone on for 5 years. And with the bitterness that has accompanied this kind of conflict, you can expect that both sides are still going to wrangle a little bit to try to get to some sort of consensus. So, yeah.
In parallel to the HNC's decision to postpone their participation in the talks in Geneva, rebel groups on the ground, represented by the HNC in Aleppo, have formed a joint operations centre, they say, to defend their city. The cessation of hostilities on the ground is in danger, not just the the talks in Geneva. Afar al-Sham and the Free Syrian Army are saying they will fight to defend Aleppo. Is that something you're concerned about?
We are concerned about, we're certainly concerned about any continuation of the violence inside Syria. We certainly are concerned about keeping in place, as best as it can be kept in place, the cessation of hostilities. Understanding that even from day one, there were violations. And even Mr. de Mistura said today, he's never known a cessation of hostilities that didn't have violations. That wasn't difficult to keep in place. So we're always concerned about any ratcheting up in the violence. We are also concerned, and I've said this before, about the expansion of the Assad regime's control inside Syria. Whether that's an expansion from a political perspective or it's an expansion from a geographic perspective, we've said that that's not a good thing for the people of Syria. And by and large, we continue to see the vast majority of violations are being perpetrated by the regime.
Which is worse then, if Assad expands his control or if the opposition successfully fight him off? Because that'll increase violence even if he prevents his expansion of control.
Right. What we that's a bit of a fool's choice. What we want to see is the cessation continue to hold. We want to see the violence get even further reduced than it already is. And we recognize that in recent days that violence has actually increased in terms of where it was for the first 4 weeks of the cessation of hostilities. So we want to see that violence come down. But in the end, the answer is a political solution, a political transition. And it's difficult, we understand, to get there, particularly when the barrel bombing continues, and it does, and the regime continues to act outside of its commitments to attack the opposition. Yeah, okay.
Is there a shift underway to get Iran to use more of its leverage on Syria to try to keep this peace talk process from unraveling? And I ask because, of course, over the weekend, Zarif and Mogherini in their talks, Mogherini asked Zarif to have Iran use its influence to get the Syrian regime to be a little bit more cooperative in the peace process. If there is a shift, is there concern, especially with the U.S. and Gulf allies, about this increased role for Iran, especially considering that some of the Gulf allies still have concerns about Iran possibly being destabilizing in the region because of its widening influence?
Well, I mean, I guess the short answer to your question is the one I gave Leslie, which is yes. I mean, the Secretary intends to raise with Foreign Minister Zarif ways in which Tehran can be more helpful going forward in the political process. And they do have influence, as you noted in your question, and we want them to use that influence in a constructive manner towards a political solution. It is no secret that that countries in the Gulf remain deeply concerned about Iran's influence in the region and their capacity and capability for destabilizing activities. We share that concern. I mean, the Secretary was just out there having these discussions, and he will be going again with the President this week for the GCC summit, where absolutely we expect discussions to occur around Iran and their continued support for terrorist networks and destabilizing activities. I think that's never gone away. And we're not bashful about discussing it with the Gulf, our Gulf partners, and frankly, we're not bashful about discussing that with Iran. And the Secretary has raised it with Foreign Minister Zarif in the past. I fully expect he'll continue to do so.
Are there any concerns about the Zarif Mogherini meeting and her request from Iran for Iran to use its leverage?
Are we worried that she's asked Iran to use its influence in a positive way? No, of course not. I mean, that's the same message that we've sent. No concerns there at all. Saeed?
I just want to follow up on something that you mentioned. You said that the regime spreading its authority over parts of Syria is not a good thing. Let me ask you something. Do you recognize any other entity in Syria to have sovereignty over that territory?
We have.
No, no,
we have,
I'm trying to
Saeed,
really
we have
understand.
talked about this before.
Okay.
That
You only, let me put it this way. As far as you're concerned, you only recognize one Syrian entity, and that is the government of Syria. You have not recognized any other group.
clearly there
as
is a
sovereign-
government. Clearly there is a government in Syria.
Right.
I'm not going to say that it doesn't exist, but it's
fine. You
being
may-
led
you-
by a man
Right.
who continues to barrel bomb and gas his people,
I'm not-
and who we have said and will continue to say. Let me finish. Has lost his legitimacy to govern his own country. Now, we've also said that as we try to get to a government that is responsive and responsible for the Syrian people, that one that they put in place over this political process, that some of those institutions of government must be maintained throughout this transitional process. Nobody's talking about taking the entire government of Syria, which we recognize exists, and tossing it out the window.
I understand. I'm not questioning the moral, whatever, diabolical regime that may commit or acts that this regime may commit
Yeah.
and so on. I'm not questioning that. I'm saying legally and diplomatically, you only recognize Syria as you have in the past. In fact, you still issue press briefings in the name of the U.S. Embassy in Syria and so on. From time to time, I see things, you know. So that is the entity that you recognize, the Arab Syrian Republic. You have not recognized anyone else as exercising any kind of authority or any kind of sovereignty over any territory of Syria.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
My question is very simple. Do you recognize any other entity in Syria to have sovereignty over that territory?
We recognize that there is a Syrian government in place. We also recognize that it's led by a dictator who continues to barrel bomb and gas his people. And that can't be, the government that's in place right now, as led by Bashar al-Assad, can't be part of the long-term future of Syria, which is why we're doing this entire political process to begin with. It's why so many nations have come together to try to resolve the civil war and the conflict there so that people can have a government in place that they've actually had a voice in putting there and that is responsive and responsible for them.
Could I follow up on the also issue of Syrian sovereignty? This weekend, the Israeli Prime Minister held a meeting in the Golan Heights, basically saying that they will never withdraw from the Golan Heights, which you recognize as occupied territory. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, I'm not going to react to everything that's said at cabinet meetings. I'm also not going to, react to every bit of rhetoric, as I've routinely not wanted to do. I would, however, reiterate that the U.S. position on the status of the Golan Heights is longstanding and is unchanged. Every administration on both sides of the aisle since 1967 has maintained that those territories are not part of Israel. The conditions under which those territories are ultimately returned should be decided through negotiations between the respective parties. And obviously, Saeed, the current situation in Syria makes it difficult to continue those efforts at this time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about Brazil, please? Can I please ask a question about Brazil?
Yeah, you can, when we're
The-
finished with Iran.
I think I will come. It's okay. Listen, it took me a little while to get used to this too. No, I know. It took me a little while to get used to it too. But what we're going to try to do is exhaust sort of this part of the world, and then we'll come around to you.
Foreign, yeah.
What do you say?
Beat to death in a torturous fashion is what we do.
Well,
All right, that's
anyway,
that's
we're
great.
gonna-
I want to ask you about something that, excuse me, I want
I'd just
to,
like to remind you that a major country
Gentlemen,
in the
gentlemen,
sphere
hang on.
just had an impeachment vote.
Gentlemen.
And I'm trying to get a reaction.
And
on that.
sir,
I
I
would-
will, sir, hang on,
This
everybody,
is-
please. This is my podium and it's my briefing room, sir. I will get to you. I promise you will get a chance to ask your question. But we try to stay on topic for a little while. It helps with transcription problems or transcription issues going forward. So Matt, please.
yeah. You may have noticed over the weekend, the Iranians showed off their parts of, at least, the new S-300 missile defense system. Under U.S. law, the Iran-Iraq Sanctions Act, advanced conventional weapons of this type, whether they're offense or defense, can be subject to sanctions if the administration deems that they are a provocation or they are destabilizing to the region. Has the administration made such a determination, or has it determined that that Iran having this missile system is not destabilizing.
We're certainly aware of the reports of the delivery. And as you know, we have made clear in the past our objections to any sale of the S-300 missile system to Iran. We've done that for quite a few years now. The Secretary has raised this personally and repeatedly with Foreign Minister Lavrov. We have long objected to the sale to Iran of such sophisticated defense capabilities, and we're going to continue to monitor this closely. I do not have any specific decisions with respect to any unilateral actions or sanctions to read out
But you
today.
do accept that this can draw sanctions.
It could.
It could.
It could, but I'm in no position now to
And
speculate
then
about whether it will.
lastly, on Iran, you mentioned earlier in response to, I think, Pam's question about you're not bashful about raising some issues with Iran. I want to know if is the Secretary in that same spirit of not being bashful with the Iranians going to raise the issues of the remaining detained Americans in Iran? And I ask this because a letter was sent to him today from the supporters, friends of Mr. Zaka, American legal permanent resident who
Yeah.
was arrested.
So there's kind of two parts to this, if you can just bear with me. So we never miss an opportunity to talk about our concerns about Americans detained overseas, and that includes when he meets with Foreign Minister Zarif. Again, so that's a constant for him. On this particular case, we are concerned about the case of Mr. Zaka, a Lebanese citizen and U.S. lawful permanent resident who's been unjustly held in Iran since September of 2015. U.S. lawful permanent residents are not U.S. passport holders and must travel on the passport of their nationality. The Immigration and Nationality Act prevents us from providing consular assistance to non-U.S. citizens. Consular assistance would be provided by the country of the individual's nationality, and I don't have any additional comments to make on this particular case. But in general, as I said at the outset, he never misses an opportunity to talk about. But this gentleman
So he doesn't get
he is not a U.S. citizen.
So the
He's a
Secretary
U.S.
doesn't-
lawful permanent resident. I
so-
didn't say that he wouldn't
Oh,
raise it, but
okay, that's what I'm
let's let the meeting happen and then
Well, has he raised the case before? This is not a new case.
I don't know if it's been raised specifically before.
Because whether he's a U.S. citizen or not, you're raising the cases of foreign nationals quite often with
Yeah.
foreign governments if you believe they. I mean, I can think of the case of the Savchenko case with the Russians, who's clearly not an American and not
That's
not
right.
a Russian. So can you find out whether Mr. Zaka's case has been raised?
I will ask.
specifically?
I will
Thank
ask
you.
if it's been raised specifically. Yeah.
So Secretary Carter was in Baghdad today, and he said he decided that there will be $415 million for the Kurds, for the Peshmerga. Was the State Department involved in the process of making this decision?
We were certainly, there was a great deal of interagency coordination that was done in arriving at this decision, and we're fully supportive, of course.
And another question: the Department of Defense says these funds will be provided by, with, and through the government of Iraq. This is money; it's not weapons. I would just want to know factually whether physically the money goes to a bank account in Baghdad and then to Erbil, or how does that work?
I have no idea how the actual funds get released and transferred, but everything you speak about it as if it's something so unique. It all goes to assistance that the United States is providing to the government of Iraq as it conducts a campaign plan against Daesh inside their country. And as we've said before, everything, all our aid and assistance will continue to go through the central government of Iraq and Baghdad. Now, exactly how the electrons get transferred and the actual dollar figures, I don't have that level of specificity, and frankly, it's not relevant. Everything is being done in coordination with Prime Minister Abadi's government.
Because the weapons, they kind of can go to Baghdad for inspection, but I just want to know whether the money can go to Baghdad.
Well, I would, if you need to know that specific about information, I'd refer you to DOD. I simply don't have that level of information.
And will it, sorry, one more just
Of
factual
course.
question. will you send the money in cash as you had after 2003?
You really
Because
need to
that's
talk
what
to
you did.
DOD. I don't have that level of detail. This was an announcement by the Defense Department, and I'd refer you to them for more details about it.
Really, when the money is sent in cash, it can, get around to different destinations that the one that you intend.
I honestly don't know the answer to your question. You really should go to DOD for that level of detail. I don't have that. Sure.
Saudi Arabia.
No, let's go to Brazil.
And who decides that?
I think I do,
Okay,
but I agree. I want to go to Brazil right
Sure.
now. Is that okay? And we'll come back to you.
of course.
All right?
Sir, does
You have
the
an-
administration see the end of the first phase of the impeachment process in Brazil as a positive or as a negative development in Latin America?
We're Go ahead.
I'll give you $10 if your answer is other than it's a case that's still underway and you're going to
Is it
decline to
possible for
comment.
us to have
Go.
a State Department answer as opposed to the
Go.
grandstanding gentleman here?
just give me a chance here, okay?
Thanks.
You got it. We're following the political situation in Brazil closely, including the lower house's April 17 vote to impeach President Rousseff. Certainly this is a challenging political moment for Brazil, but as we've said all along, we believe Brazil's institutions are sufficiently mature to address the country's challenges. We're confident that Brazilians will work through these difficult political questions democratically and in accordance with Brazil's constitutional principles. And that's our statement.
And anything
That's our
beyond that?
statement. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question on the follow-up?
You're going to ask me a
Yeah,
question
I'm
about
gonna ask a
Brazil?
question because I'm interested.
Okay.
Now that it goes to the Senate, and there is 81 members in that Senate, and they are leaning in one direction. I mean, they are almost of one political orientation. Do you feel that maybe the president of Brazil is being subject to some sort of a coup, considering that her problem was only an accounting problem?
I've stated our reaction for the record, Said. I'm not going to go beyond that. We are, again, we're convinced that Brazil and the Brazilian people can handle this in accordance with their own constitutional principles and in a democratic fashion. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. The Saudi Arabia say that they will sell off hundreds billions of dollars worth of American assets held by the kingdom if Congress passes a bill that would allow the Saudis to held responsible for September 11 attacks. And I was wondering what's the State Department's position on that?
Well, look, I think the Secretary has already spoken to our concern about this particular legislation and the possible precedent that it could open up. So I would, and we can get you his comments that he's made in congressional testimony about this. So I'd point you to that. As for the position of the Saudi government about this pending legislation, I'd refer you to Saudi authorities to speak to their reaction to it. What I can tell you is we have already made clear, the Secretary in testimony, our concerns about the possible precedent and potential harm that it could have to our own interests overseas in many countries. And again, we'd point you to that. And then lastly, I just say Saudi Arabia continues to be a very close partner on so many issues. And they were instrumental in getting the opposition together in Riyadh back in December and to helping us get this whole political process started. We partner with them against terrorism elsewhere in the region. And they contribute to the coalition against Daesh in Iraq. So it doesn't mean that we're always going to see eye to eye with the Saudis on every issue, but on the issues of terrorism, there is much work to be done and much collaboration that has occurred and will continue to occur. Now just broadly speaking, because I know this also gets at the issue of those who suffered and continue to suffer from the losses on 9/11. Nothing's changed about our commitment to them, to the grieving process that we know they're still going through, and to doing everything we can as a government to help them. Okay?
Would you agree that the tensions between the United States and Saudi Arabia are at an all-time high in this administration ahead of the president's upcoming visit?
I wouldn't characterize it that way.
You wouldn't?
No.
How would you characterize the relationship?
As I said, even the best of friends are going to disagree on issues. And what's healthy is that you can have a discussion and you can have a debate and you can differ over whatever the issue is. And we're not bashful about doing that. But that doesn't change the essential fact that Saudi Arabia remains a key partner as we continue to confront terrorism in the region and around the world. And we're going to continue to look for ways to improve that coordination and that cooperation.
Do you expect that the issue of this bill, the issue of the 28 pages, will overshadow or be part of the conversation, or are the U.S., is the administration anyway, and the kingdom sort of in agreement on these issues, and therefore it won't be a topic of discussion?
If you're asking me to get ahead of the GCC, I won't do that. I mean, there is a lot of issues to discuss in Riyadh. The Secretary is looking forward to going and to be and to accompanying the President. Clearly, the ongoing fight against Daesh, the need to continue to work towards a political solution in Syria, continuing to fight AQAP in places like Yemen, all those things are really important for GCC countries to discuss at the end of the week, and I have no doubt that they will. Not to mention, and certainly not to ignore, and when I was talking to Pam, the continued concerns that they have over Iran and Iran's destabilizing activities. I think there's going to be enough of a robust agenda of things to talk about. Whether this particular issue will come up, I couldn't say.
Has Kerry, sorry, and if this has already been asked, I apologize, but has Kerry read the 28 pages in question here?
I don't know, Justin.
On the GCC meeting, do you expect the Secretary will have bilats with other foreign ministers or leaders during this time that are separate from the
I
President?
don't have additional details on his schedule to announce at this time.
right.
And if we do,
All right,
certainly-
I want to know if, in the context of any meeting he might have with with officials from the with Emirati officials, if the case of the father and son, the Eldorads, imprisonment will come up. As we've talked about here before, there's a end of May court date for them. They've alleged some pretty horrendous treatment while in detention there, and it would seem that this should be a high priority for the administration, particularly in a country like the Emirates, which you count as a very close friend and partner.
Yeah, look, as I said, when we get closer to this, if we have additional details to talk to with respect to his agenda, if he conducts bilats and what they are, we'll certainly announce those to you. And as you know, we read them out. This particular case is one we have raised publicly and, of course, privately with Emiratis, and we continue to monitor it closely. I don't expect that that's going to change at all. Abby?
Do you have any details on the extent of U.S. assistance to Japan in the wake of the recent earthquakes?
I don't have a lot, other than I think you may have seen DoD speak to some air support that they're providing. I'm not aware of anything additional other than that at this time. Obviously, we remain in close contact with Japanese authorities and are willing to help in any way they deem appropriate. Obviously, these are decisions they have to make. We certainly are willing to contribute capabilities as needed. But as far as I know, as we speak right now, the only thing that they've asked for that we're providing is a measure of air support. It's okay. She had
It's a
another
separate subject, though, so if you're following up on that.
About earthquakes, but if you want to keep going, I'll wait.
You're against them, right?
Yeah.
one. Yes, the earthquakes are. Yes.
5 years.
Is there anything more you can tell us about the American killed in Ecuador? Did you give us all you have at the top there?
I'm afraid I've given you all I've got right
And
now.
that is you're only saying that one American is.
We know of one U.S. citizen killed at this time, and we have been in contact with the family.
And do you suspect any more may be missing?
I couldn't
or unaccounted
speculate.
for?
I couldn't
Okay.
speculate. We are still trying to work with, as I said, authorities there to get a better sense of the whereabouts of all American citizens that were in the region and could possibly be affected. But you've seen the imagery yourself. You know how difficult it can be to do a proper accounting. We're going to continue to work at this. And when I have information that I am confident enough to share with you, I will do it. Right now, I'm only confident in letting you know that we're aware of one American
But
citizen killed.
you don't even have a rough location of where that person was?
I don't. I'm afraid I don't. I don't know the circumstances.
You're working with the authorities to identify any other, whether there are any other missing Americans, or you're working with Ecuadorian authorities to track down a notional list of possible Americans?
Well, it's both. I mean, we're
so you
trying
have
to.
some names that are possibly
No,
missing.
no, I didn't say that. What I mean is, I think we have to work under the presumption that there very well may have been additional American citizens in some way affected. But I don't. So that's a working assumption we have to make. It would be imprudent not to. But I don't have a number. As you know, we don't track. That we can't. There's no way to track the number of Americans that are, visiting any particular spot at any particular time. So we're just going to keep working with Ecuadorian authorities as they continue to work through this. And when I have information that, again, I'm confident enough that we can share with you, we'll do that. And right now, it's just the one that we're aware of. Abby, you had another. Let me get to Abby. Then
do you have any comment on the recent reports of an attack on a bus in Jerusalem?
Well, we certainly have seen the reports of this explosion on a bus in Jerusalem. We're watching this as closely as we can. Israeli authorities are really a better source of information at this time. I don't have any more specific information about the exact cause or if it. I know they said that they're treating this as if it was an act of terrorism. We have no information that would lead us to dispute that, but this is really something for them to speak to. I'm not aware of any, as we speak right now, I'm not aware of any impact of that explosion on American citizens, but we're going to be, obviously staying in very close contact and touch with Israeli authorities going forward.
Do we
And
stay
again,
there?
if we have information that we're comfortable enough sharing as we move forward, we'll do that.
Can we stay there?
Yeah.
So the much vaunted cameras on the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif
Yeah.
concept / idea / project appears to have finally bitten the dust today, with the Jordanians saying they're dropping the whole thing. This was one of the main things that Secretary Kerry pointed to as a success when he was back in the region in October, trying to calm the situations down. So, what's your reaction, or what's his, if you've talked to him about it?
Yeah, certainly have seen the reports there that they're halting their plans. I think, in general, we still believe that tools like cameras could be a very useful way of increasing transparency and potentially helping work to decrease the violence. So we still see the value in the use of cameras. Now, the Jordanians can speak to the decision that they've made now to halt this project. We think it's unfortunate, and we continue to believe in the value of that tool for that purpose. And more broadly, we continue to urge all sides to restore calm, reduce the violence, and take affirmative steps.
Well, is the camera idea one that the administration or the secretary in particular is willing to bring up again to try to revive?
I think I would just leave it where I did. We still see that there's a value to that tool.
The Jordanians say that they're dropping it because of the concerns from the Palestinians.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are you willing, or do you think it is an important enough idea to try to convince President Abbas and other Palestinian officials of the need or the desirability of having these?
I don't have anything specifically to announce today about whether or not the Secretary is going to revisit the idea with Jordanian authorities. But again, I just say we continue to believe that tool is a good one to increase transparency. And while we supported the cameras as a means, we still have been clear that implementation obviously is up to the parties. And one of the parties now, in this case, has decided not to move forward. As I said, it's unfortunate. I can't tell you at this time that we're going to be assertive in terms of trying to have it revisited, but it doesn't mean that we've changed our mind with respect to the value of that as a tool to increase transparency.
So your impression is that the Jordanian decision is final. It's not just putting the whole project on hold.
Well, I mean,
and may be
I can just
revisited
point you
later
to
on.
what they've said. They've
Because
said
it's only like a few days ago it went into action. I mean, you know, what made them decide all of a
Well,
sudden?
you'd have to talk to them. I don't know. I mean, this is a decision they made. I can only go by what we've heard them say about it, that they've halted the program. Again, we still think there's value in that, but these are the implementation has to be up to the parties. They are one of the parties. They've made this decision, and they should speak for the reasons why they did that. Okay.
The South Korean authorities have said that North Korea is ready to conduct its fifth nuclear test at any time. Do you agree with this assessment, and are you taking any steps to prepare for it?
Seen those comments. We take all those kinds of threats seriously. We have to, given the past behavior of the regime. I won't talk about intelligence matters, but I can just tell you we're watching this as closely as we can. And again, it does bear repeating, as it often does when we talk about the North, that we continue to call on them to stop these destabilizing activities and to prove that they are willing to return to the six-party process.
Another question on North Korea.
Sure.
So 3 Nobel laureates are planning to go to North Korea in early May for a science event, which will include workshops and talking to students. They believe by engaging with the younger generation is the right approach. I wonder if you have any stand on this.
I actually don't. I mean, I think I'd point you to the organization that's sponsoring their trip to speak to it. They really should speak to this. I mean, we're not in the business of doing that for each and every individual that travels overseas, even to the North. So they should speak for this.
What kind of message do you think this is sending to the North Korea regime or to the younger people?
Again, I would point you to the organization that's organizing that travel to speak to the purposes behind it, and if there's some sort of message behind it, and I'm not saying there is, they should speak to that.
Can I have another question on Cameroon? Do you have anything on this unfortunate accident in Cameroon where Ambassador Power's motor car struck a boy?
Yeah.
Is there any discussion to provide compensation to the family out of the U.S. government?
I don't know about any plans for compensation. I just don't have an update for you on that. But obviously, we all here are grieving with the family of that young boy who was killed by the vehicle in the convoy. And as I think you saw reported, Ambassador Power, who certainly is feeling this very deeply, visited with the family today to express her deep regrets over what happened. I don't have any update in terms of next steps here, but we all share in the grief and the sorrow that resulted from this tragic, just terrible, terrible accident. Yeah.
Can I ask one question on Libya? You have any comment on the visit of the Foreign Minister of England, Britain, Philip Hammond, to Libya today? Is that good? Is that a good thing to bolster the unity government? And will Secretary Kerry do the same?
I don't
thing
have any
anytime?
travel for the Secretary
Right.
to announce. We certainly are aware that Foreign Minister Hammond traveled to Tripoli. And as I understand it, the German Foreign Minister, the French Foreign Minister, and the Italian Foreign Minister have also traveled to Tripoli last week. I think they should speak to the details of their travel, reasons behind it, goals, objectives for that. But we certainly stand with them in our support and their support of the Libyan government now that's in Tripoli. So, I mean, and again, we don't have any travel for our part, for the Secretary to announce today. Yeah. Okay, thanks everybody.